Long he had seen it, growing high, a golden bough on an old oak. And there came time when iron-clad strangers came to the land, led by their great champion. There came time when the god, climbing up at last one midsummer, picked the mistletoe. And then he took it back to that strange green mound, beset by ancient ash, ringed with old stones, like discarded teeth, wreathed in a darkness that no light can quite see through. Coming at last to his smithy, he built such a mighty fire, and blew then such a mighty glow, that men saw it as far as Salisbury. And there in that mound of steel and blood he forged around the golden bough the sacred sword, the mistletoe. And as he forged, he said, "May you have power beyond life and death, and bind the two, so that if you are not used for what you are meant to be, a curse will fall upon you, until some brave man can break you. May this curse then last." And then the smithy took the blade to those tribes that fought the ironclad strangers. And for a while, the strangers were beaten back for a century or more, staying on their side of the great ocean. Time went by with the running water and the falling trees. Years became centuries. The blade, the mistletoe, had been lost, dedicated back to the smithy after the strangers had been beaten. Fates change, faiths change. In this world all things change. There came a time of war again. A champion who bore the name of kings, although he fought on his own side, Serding, one day came, after some hard-fought campaign, to there where the water flows like milk, there to where the hawk cools high above the down, and the wild grass still grows. He came then to the mound, and thinking that he would spend a night in it, crept there where no lantern can quite shine, and spending the night in the deep darkness. Now at midnight he woke up and lit a candle, and just at that hour, for it was the moon after midsummer, the full moon shone down deep into the smithy, the only light it could ever know. And in the cold moonlight he saw it, half hidden under grime and under stone, an old sword, as longer than his leg, a great sword then, and yet strangely light, that cut with a will of its own. And so Serding found the mistletoe, and with that blade he led a brutal battle, beating invaders back, holding all those who had followed him in some kind of slavery. Again and again, impelled as if it were by some wild power, he fought and fought, and with the blade, the mistletoe, men said none could strike him down. And time didn't seem to wither him for a while. But then, as the years became centuries, His skin started to waste upon his body. His hands became as bone. Only his hot eyes burned with the same terror that they had of old. A terror of a soul in torment. A terror that would spread terror in the hearts of those that saw it. Less and less then came amongst men, until at last there came a day when his name was almost forgotten. Some said that somewhere amongst the barrows there still dwelt a dark power, but none disturbed it. As years wore on and became centuries once again, their land was at peace. Men stretched out, here and there and everywhere. A great kingdom came. Farmers came even to the milk-white hills, and there sheep grazed, and shepherds strayed once again into the dark barrows, in the cold and in the wind, treating them perhaps like bothies. But men noticed that sometimes the shepherds disappeared. And then, in nearby Salisbury, men started to vanish too. First of all, one by one, in the old city walls built by the great people, they vanished. And then somehow in the open streets, some were found, half eaten. Some were never found. And men wondered what was up there in the wild hills that had come at last to the city. Some kind of dark curse laid upon the land. Some kind of vision. Some kind of nightmare. It would ride in the dark of the morn and in the bright of the morn. And at those times all men hid at last. There came then to Salisbury Ale. Ale was a smith, a follower of that old god Wayland, although he dared not say his name any more. And he had with him a cold, cold metal hammer, such as could beat any blade out or break any blade in two. And he came as a man driven by a vision, coming to the Lord of Salisbury and said, I will rid you of your curse upon your hills. And the old Lord of Salisbury looked at him long and said, maybe. But know this, it is not whatever wraith is up there that you fear, but his sword. You must break the sword in two, else it break you and us. And Ale scratched the back of his head and said, grows against the grain to destroy great workmanship. But it's true, my lord. And here the hall paused for breath for fear of what he might say. But he added no more. My lord has told me, though, that I must take that sword and break it at the last. And so Ale rode off into the wild downlands, where bramble had grown where grass once was, as the shepherds had fled down to the cities. He came at last to a high hill that was surrounded then and now and always by the holy high ash. And inside the thicket he found again that strange dark gate, cold and old as time, before the gods that made the gods. That door had stood upon the grass. And he looked inside, and he saw nothing, only dark and the whisper of old bones. And so Nael sat down against the stone, for he knew better than to go inside, to follow the dark power into its domain. And although a chill wind seemed to blow out of the old stone door, he sat by it as the sun set and the full moon rose, the first moon after midsummer. And Eyal had drawn his hood about himself, so he blended into the stone. And if truth be said, he was rocking himself gently, almost asleep, when suddenly something whispered in his dreams, something cold, something old, stone on stone. He felt it rise like a gorge rises, rise like hate builds in the stomach, like that tightness that bursts as fear. And looking up, he saw that the gate was darker than even it had been. Something was coming through. Old and cold, pale blue eyes that told of time long forgotten, and in its left hand a mighty sword, dark, that shone dark in the moonlight. Shone dark, he wondered, but it was true. It seemed to shine with blackness, although the moon filled its edge of its blade with silver light. And the creature threw back a hood, and there was his head, made of wisps of hair and old bone, stronger than stone, and the blue eyes were on Eyal, and Serding spoke. "You have come, a sacrifice this time. Well, I will not be kind for all of that." And a shadow like a tongue licked lips that was dry as dust, as the great sword was risen against the dark. Suddenly Eyal stood up, and in his hand he held a dagger, and he pointed the dagger at Serding and said, "I am bound by a power older than you to take that sword from you, to return it to its maker at the last. Will you give it to me for free? Willingly, and so be free, be bone and dust." And Serdang took a step back, and if a skull can pull a face, his looked for a moment with a flicker of hope, and the hope clouded to fear, and without any further answer, he struck down at Eyal. Now Eyal had a smith's nimbleness, used as he was to jumping aside from dust and ash. So he jumped aside and drew out from his belt a blacksmith's hammer, wrought of nickel and cold wrought iron. And once again he looked at Serding and said, "Will you not give up now?" And Serding smiled and said, "Do you not know that not even your hammer can strike me? For look." And he pulled apart his shirt, and it was true. His ribcage was full of swords, arrows, bones, even the mark of a hammer. For nothing could touch it, and all weapons were caught in it. And then, in almost curiosity, Eyal threw his dagger, and in truth it caught inside the bone. And Serding laughed and said, "You see, you are mine." And he pulled up his hood, and the moon went behind cloud, and Serding seemed to be consumed by darkness. Eyal took a step back. He knew the creature was coming for him. in that darkness, meant to take him from behind. He jumped around, when suddenly, out of the corner of his smith's eye, the eye that could see always, the sharded metal and the spark, he saw a sword glimmer. And then he took out his mighty hammer and struck down, not at the lich, but rather at the blade, hitting the haft of the blade full hard with a full smith's might, catching it then against the old barrow stone. Suddenly the blade rang out, sung out, called out, and jerked itself free of the hand. And Serding appeared again, and as he appeared, his face went to shift and shadow, to dark and dust, to dust, to dust at last, and he was gone. And then Ael was left with Mistletoe the blade, and he got ready with his hammer, meaning to break the blade then and there. But then he thought of all the woes of the world he could solve with that blade, and in an evil hour caught it up. Now men said he became once again he became a champion offer, and ruled the fates both dark and light. But as the years turned, he became more evil, until at last, up there in the barrows leading a war host, some strange bolt of lightning struck him, wielded, they said, by the gods, and jerked the sword Mistletoe out of his hand. And that it still lies there in that old barrow, for men did not dare touch it again, but buried it where it lay, under the stones. And so that if you go there today, you will feel it, in that darkness that no eye can see through, in that coldness that no fire can warm, in those secrets that are whispered beyond the ken of human. You know the blade lies there still, for evil or for good, as the ash trees grow, and the old gods watch the fate of the mistletoe they once made.